this morning's planning meeting, one item agenda, but an important item just nevertheless. Can I ask if we have two deputations, one from the community councils and one from the developer, requests for both to speak. Can we agree?
Agreed.
Convener, could I ask a question first?
Yep.
Convener. With requests from Shield Hill in California as a standalone, and the application isn't in their community council ward, and we have a 5 community council deputation which Shield Hill in California are part of. So we're hearing for Shield Hill in California on 2 occasions, one standalone and one as part of the deputation. And if so, why?
Might I speak, because I can explain?
Well, hang on a minute, yeah, we'll get the explanation from our legal advisor.
Thank you. Thank you, convener. I will hopefully be saying the same thing as Ms Montanaro. The community councils have been represented by a firm of solicitors called New Economy Law, and Mr Raman had put in a standing request for a deputation. That's noted on the supplementary agenda, but I understand that our clerk, Karen, had correspondence with Mr Raman, who indicated that Ms Montanaro would be speaking on behalf of the community councils.
So we're only one deputation then, community councils.
There are 2 in total. There's one from the applicant, and the applicants are in attendance, and also Ms Montanaro.
Yeah,
thank you, Councillor Blackwood.
We received a paper yesterday saying there were 3 requests to speak, so now there's only 2. Is that correct?
It can't appear so.
That's fine. That's fine. Just the correspondence yesterday said 3 requests for speaking. One from the applicant, one from Shield Hill, California, and one from 5 community councils which Shield Hill are part of. If there's only 2, that's fine. Only got the applicant and the deputation, then I'm quite happy with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yeah, there's 2. Can we agree to hear the deputations?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. The what we'll do is I'll ask the department to have this case. I'm coming to that. I'll ask the department to introduce the report when the time comes, and speak to it first, rather than the deputations, for the simple reason that I think that it's such a complex issue as this one. Better to hear the officers first. Okay, we have the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of August 2021. Can we accept those?
Agreed.
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 And do we have any apologies?
Thank you, convener. Yes, we have apologies submitted by councillors McCluckie and Kerr. Thank you, convener.
Okay. And do you have any declarations of interest? Unintimated. So we can move on. Bernard, you speaking to this report?
Thank you. It's a combination between myself and the case officer, Julie Seidel. So I'll just kick off first. Members will recall that this application was considered by the Planning Committee at the meeting on 5th of March 2018. Committee was minded to grant planning permission subject to the conclusion of a Section 75 planning obligation. For the reasons detailed in paragraph 2 of the report, the Section 75 was not concluded, and the final determination of the application was delayed. Given the circumstances outlined in paragraph 2 of the report, it's the advice of legal counsel that it's appropriate for the application to be considered afresh by the Planning Committee. Since the application was last considered by the committee, the development plan against which the application was assessed has been replaced by the Falkirk Local Development Plan 2. As set out in paragraph 34 of the report before you today, the determination of all applications should be carried out under section 25 of the Town and Country Planning Act, which states that applications should be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. It's therefore appropriate for the application to be reassessed against the current development plan. The report before you does this. In addition, given the passage of time, officers have re-notified neighbours of the application, and we've also sought responses from updated responses from consultees. These are detailed in the report before you today. I'll now pass over to Julie Seidel, who will give a summary of the report before you. You'll see in the report that there's mention that further comments were awaited from NHS Forth Valley. Since the report was drafted, we've received a further response from them, and Julie will also make reference to that, and in outlining the recommendation, give an update which takes account of comments that we've had from NHS Forth Valley. So I'll pass over to Julie. Thanks.
Thank you, Bernard. Are you able to show the plans for the application, please?
Yeah, will do.
This application relates to the development of 91 dwelling houses to the southwest of Tapernail Farm. Access would be taken via the existing vehicular access serving Hillcrest Square, and the proposed development is a mixture of detached, semi-detached and terraced housing. Landscaping is shown to the south and west of the site, and this includes drainage proposals and an equipped play area. As Bernard outlined in his introduction, given the passage of time, new consultations were carried out in order to get an up-to-date view from our consultees. The Roads Development Unit, Environmental Protection Unit, the Coal Authority, Scottish Water and SEPA do not object to the application and raised no new issues. Children's Services advised that the proposed development would exacerbate pressures at Braes High School, and a contribution is required based on the current index rates for education. Members should note that this is a reduction on education contributions which were originally requested for the application, and this is discussed in section 13 of the update report. The Transport Planning Unit response remains the same as originally submitted, and contributions are sought to improve bus service provision. Their response is discussed in sections 8 to 11 of the update report. As Bernard rightly states, NHS Forth Valley have now provided a consultation response to us. They advise that the proposed development is located within the catchment for Meadowbank Health Centre. This includes Braes View's medical practice, which specifically serves the application site. Braes View's medical practice are operating at capacity, and contributions are required to mitigate the additional patient demand which would be generated by this development. A contribution of £1,177 per unit, a total of £107,107 is sought. The Shield Hill and California Community Council and Reading Muirhead and Wollastone Community Council made representation in relation to this application in 2017. Given the passage of time, again, both community councils were notified that the application would be presented back to Planning Committee and were allowed an opportunity to make further comment. The additional community council representations are summarised in section 18 to 27 of the update report. The Maddiston Community Council, Brighton's Community Council and Avonbridge and Stanburn Community Council have all objected to the application on basis of support for the objectives of Braes Green Space. The Braes Green Space representation is detailed in section 29 and 30 of the update report. Additionally, an objection was received from New Economy Law on behalf of the community councils. In terms of representations, all persons who had already made comment on the application were notified and given a further opportunity to make comment. We also reserved neighbour notification. 13 additional objections and 2 letters of support were received, and these are summarised in sections 28 to 32 of the update report. In addition to those representations, a petition with 213 signatures were received supporting Bray's green space. As Bernard's already touched on, the application is presented back to the Planning Committee so that a fresh determination of the application can be made. Since members last heard the application, the Falkirk Local Development Plan 2 was adopted by the Council, and this is a new policy framework which requires to be assessed. The application is an allocated housing site within the new local plan with a capacity for 91 units. As such, the application for housing development is supported in principle by the development plan. In addition, the application is assessed as being in accordance with all other relevant policies, and the full policy assessment is detailed at section 34 to 46 of the updated report. Bernard, would it be possible to look at some site photographs? Members should note that there are no significant changes to the application site since the Planning Committee last visited. I've taken some photographs so that members can have a look at the site circumstances. Photograph number 1 is a view from the access road serving Hillcrest Square, showing the area where the new access road would be taken to access the new development. Photograph number 2 is showing a view from the Tapernail Farm access road, looking west over into the application site. This photograph is from the main public road to the south of the site, the B810, looking north into the application site, and you can just see some of the existing properties there in the skyline. This is a photograph from within the site, again looking north, and again you can see some of those properties which are in existence there at Hillcrest Square. This is a view from within the site looking northwest. You can see the site conditions. It's quite scrubby, overgrown land. There are a few trees. This is another photograph from the main road, the B810. And it's looking west across the frontage of the site. Again, you can just see some of those existing properties to the right of the photograph. This is a view from the Belmont Avenue open space, looking backwards east towards the application site. And the last photograph is just showing the Belmont Avenue open space, as that's referred to in some of the representations. While some time has passed since the application was originally considered by the Planning Committee, it's considered that no new policy or material planning considerations have been identified, which would alter the recommendation to Planning Committee of minded to grant planning permission. The application is assessed as being in accordance with the development plan, and the site is allocated as a housing opportunity with a capacity for 91 dwellings. It's recommended that the Planning Committee are minded to grant planning permission subject to the conclusion of a legal agreement. This would be in relation to the provision of affordable housing on site and financial contributions towards Braes High School, open space and bus service provision. It's also recommended that members include the healthcare contributions which were discussed earlier. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Before we open it to members, can we hear the deputations? Maria, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Convener. The officer's report before you recommends approval of the application in line with LGB2 and development plan. Committee members, we ask that you put aside any party directive today and urge you individually in the strongest possible terms to refuse this planning application if you have any doubts about the legitimacy of the application approval in March 2018 and the consequent site inclusion in LDP2 at the increased unit capacity based on that decision, despite a reduction in site size by a third. SEC believe this is a material consideration. Please consider very carefully your decision. As members are aware, there is no right of appeal for communities. In the event Persimmon do appeal a refusal to grant permission, Braes Green Space Schio and Braes communities will have the opportunity to put forward their case to the Scottish Government, despite having no right of appeal themselves, to do so on behalf of their communities. Our request is made based on the examination of the site history from inclusion in LDP1 to approval of this application back in March 2018, and demonstrates more than bias, but unmerited special favour. In June 2010, 4 plot applications for the development of land for residential purposes on the site were made by James Kerr, prior to him becoming first a community councillor for Shield Hill in California, then an Upper Braes councillor, and more recently Falkirk Conservative Party leader. All 4 applications were refused. Shield Hill and California Community Council and Reading Muirhead and Wallystone Community Councils having both objected to planning applications. 3 months following refusal of the plots, the site was put forward in a call for sites for inclusion in the MIR LDP1. Committee document item 2, MIR September 2011, page 26, recommended further growth in Shield Hill not be favoured, stating, Shield Hill is already a very large village prominently located on a ridge with limited services, and although the primary school has some capacity, further significant growth is not favoured. The recommendation by officers was ignored when the site was put forward by the Economic Strategy and Development Committee at its meeting on the 20th of September 2011 for a change of status of the site from non-preferred site to preferred site following the intervention of Councillor John McCluskey. This despite local communities' objections.
Maria, I think we're wandering into personal issues.
No, I'm just stating the facts. It was the only and this is relevant, it was the only non-preferred greenfield site to be treated in this manner, despite over half of all objections to the MIR being for this one site. As a community councillor, James Kerr voted not to support an objection by SCCC on behalf of Shield community to the site's inclusion in LDP1, when he should have declared an interest and not have voted. The chair...
Convener, can I just ask you to ask Ian's opinion of what's being said here?
Certainly, I'm a wee bit concerned myself. Ian.
Thank you, Convener. And I think the report before us today is to be considered on the planning grounds. I don't think the procedural history around the matter is the subject of the debate today. It is what's before the committee and for it to take a view on the planning considerations.
I agree with that. Could you please, Maria, understand the depth of feeling, but could you please refrain from targeting individual members?
Could I say these are the facts? This is information which we have presented to you as Falkirk Council in our representations, and it determines what we feel is a material consideration, which is the legitimacy in the way this planning application has come forward. I'll carry on. The chair in a follow-up email to the meeting, and this is all evidence. This is a meeting. This is a normal monthly meeting this happened in, and the chair then.
What I'm saying, though, Maria, is it's irrelevant to the considerations that we have today.
Well, if you consider them irrelevant, then don't consider them when you consider your decision. But the chair in a follow-up email to the meeting stated he believed it to be a done deal, and Shield Hill and California not SSC time.
Now this is ridiculous.
Okay, well then I'll carry on. I won't mention
Maria,
yourself, Convener. I understand.
Okay, I'll try not to mention.
Convener, it's absolutely ridiculous what's being said here. I don't want to be any party of this.
No, and nor will I.
Me,
I'll leave the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll carry on and not mention them.
Thank you.
Neither Muirhead nor Shield Hill are identified as strategic growth areas in LDP1 or LDP2 due to the previous large-scale development and lack of infrastructure capacity. In allocating the site, Falkirk Council, in response to LDP1 report, has stated, the Council intends this to be a relatively small and contained development which consolidates the existing development and Hillcrest Tapernail Farm, with the majority of the site retained and improved as green space. It is therefore important that the site capacity, 30 units, is adhered to in this instance. The reporter to LTP1, commenting on the 643 letters of objection by Shield Hill residents in his determination, stated, the representations confirmed that local residents value the use of the green space around Hillcrest for recreation. I am satisfied that the reference in the site comments for H69 about the safeguarding of green space and extensive tree planting provides scope to keep some recreational value, possibly in the form of a community woodland. The site has been reduced in size by a third in LTP2, yet the unit capacity has increased over threefold from 30 to 91 units, and the current application does not provide the majority substantial green space, extensive tree planting or habitat enhancement envisaged in LTP1. The reporter to LTP1 public inquiry, in response to a representation by the landowner who considered that the site comments about green space requirements were overly prescriptive, stated, and this is important, how critical these space requirements are to allowing development on the site at all, and it follows that I'm not prepared to reduce them to any degree. Persimmon's application P1704 is a resubmission of planning application P170706, which was refused by Planning Committee in April 2007. The first three reasons for refusal are summarised as: 1, the proposed development exceeded the LTP housing capacity of 30 units and represents an overdevelopment of the site. 2, coalescence with the neighbouring villages of Shield Hill and Reading Head, contrary to the Falkirk Local Development Plan. And 3, inadequate provision of green space. The update report to P1706 application states, page 2, housing land supply. In relation to effective housing land supply, the Council acknowledges that there is a shortfall equating to 4.3 years supply of housing. This does not provide justification for the proposed development. The development of a rural site substantially exceeding the housing allocation site capacity does not represent sustainable development, and it is noted that greenfield sites are last in the order of preference as specified in policy HSGO1. The reasons for refusal of application P170706 FUL were valid and material when the Planning Committee granted this application P170504 on the 3rd of March 2018. Is it any wonder, therefore, that communities are concerned over the unmerited special favour shown to this particular application? I do go on to say about the bus contribution being removed despite a meeting organised by Councillor Clucky, which was the most well-attended public meeting in Shield Hill in over 20 years, following the demise of the number 13 bus service and knowing his constituents' concerns. The only developer the landowner was interested in attracting was a major house builder to build out to site capacity. It was and still is for Falkirk Council to ensure the delivery of the vision for the site, a small contained development with majority of site green space provision. How can a development of 91 units possibly be considered consolidation of Hillcrest, a brownfield site of just 10 units? Financial monetary contributions cannot compensate for the loss of this green space, which would result if the application is granted. The officer acknowledges the relatively remote location of the site from public and other services in the report. Following COVID restrictions and given the inadequacy of existing open space and parkland provision, the site's current use as informal open green space, as was shown by the desire lines on those photographs, and Shield Hill and Hillcrest topography, even greater significance and importance needs to be attributed to the informal open green space this green space provides. This is a material consideration which justifies the presence of the green space and refusal of the application. Now then, finally, Upper Brace councillors James Clare, John McCluckin and an unnamed third party were charged by police under the bribery act.
Maria, you're venturing into dangerous waters.
If I explain, we as community councils, these joint community councils, made legal representation to the Lord Advocate. I would like to give you his response because the councillors claimed they were exonerated. Can I quote his response from the Lord Advocate? We are concerned about the legitimacy of this application.
No, I don't think
This is ridiculous.
I don't think it'd be appropriate.
It's ridiculous.
I think you should stick to the planning issues and address those.
Okay.
Finished?
No, I'm having to edit that, or the Lord Advocate's response, I'm having to edit, so I'll just finish off with the last paragraph. Committee members, we recommend and urge you to refuse the application. Should members be minded to grant the application and the Persimmon development proceed, it will be too late to safeguard and protect the immunity the site currently provides and the potential aspired to by Braes Green Space EO, supported by Avonbridge and Stanburn, Brightons, Maddiston, Reading, Muirhead and Wallystone and Shield Hill community councils on behalf of their communities. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. We have a second deputation from Persimmons. Who's here from Persimmons?
It's myself, Gordon Johnson.
Right, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Good morning, committee. My name is Gordon Johnson. I'm the Land Director for Persimmon Homes East Scotland. I'd like to thank you for your time today and getting to make this deputation to you. We welcome the report before you today and that our application is once again recommended for approval. The key principle we would request that members bear in mind in determining our application is that the site under consideration is allocated in your adopted local development plan for residential development of 91 units. The principle of the site for residential development is established by the development plan, and the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act requires the determination of planning applications shall be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Whilst this application was originally recommended for approval under different circumstances, the decision before you today is much clearer. It is a fact that this site has been considered through the LDP adoption process and thus has been reviewed independently by the government's reporter. Both Falkirk Council, in proposing the allocation for 91 units, and the reporter in supporting it, provide confirmation that development in this location and of this scale is considered appropriate. Furthermore, there have been no objections from either statutory consultees or the Council's internal consultees, and the officer has stated that our application complies with the relevant local development plan policies. Thus, we agree with the conclusion that there are no material considerations which would support the refusal of this application, and therefore approval is the merited decision. Approval of this application would result in significant investment in Falkirk and the delivery of much needed new housing, including 23 affordable homes. In addition, it would secure Section 75 contributions totalling more than £600,000. These houses will bring new families to these communities, who will in turn bring children to the schools, spend money in local shops and use local services. It is our strong belief that this development will be a positive addition, not a negative drain as suggested by some. Persimmon Homes recognises that this site has generated strong feeling among some members of the community. We are also aware that there is a desire for the site not to be developed and instead become a community open space. In this regard, we would advise that the land is privately owned as well as allocated for development in the adopted local development plan, but most importantly is under legal contract to Persimmon Homes. It is our understanding that whilst this is the case, a proposed community purchase under Scottish Government right to buy legislation would not be considered. Whilst the aspirations of Braes Green Space Group are commendable, in planning terms, you cannot simply ignore the fact that the site is allocated in the LDP for residential development because it is inconvenient. As the paper before you states, the aspirations of Braes Green Space do not outweigh the LDP2 and justify the refusal of planning permission in this instance. Our development proposals include public open spaces as well as new play equipment which will be available for use by the new residents and the wider community. In addition, a contribution of over £70,000 towards open space improvements in Falkirk will be secured. A contribution of £330,000 towards improved bus services will also be of benefit not just to the residents of the proposed housing, but to all members of the community. As stated in our supporting statement, we consider the aspirations of both the Shield Hill and California Community Action Plans to be positive and worthy of support. If consent is granted for the proposed development, we believe that the new members of the community accommodated by these homes will help achieve some of the action plan objectives, such as improved bus services, improved green spaces, encouraging more clubs and activities for young people, and to bring people together. Ultimately, we believe these action plans are looking for investment in these communities, and that is exactly what Persimmon Homes is proposing to do. To conclude, Persimmon Homes recognises this site has a long history and that it has generated many objections. Nonetheless, it is important that the decision members come to today is based upon current circumstances and against the adopted policies of the local development plan. Therefore, we concur with the conclusion of the officer's report that no material considerations which outweigh LDP2 have been identified, and therefore request that members support the recommendation and approve the application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the floor? No. I open it to comments, debate, and scrutiny. So Blackwood.
Yeah, I think I'll probably move that we accept the recommendation. The only question that is on the bus service. This is for 3 years, and what happens after 3 years? And I know what will happen. First bus will be knocking on the council's door asking for funding to keep the bus running, and we will not afford that. So after 3 years, that bus service will deteriorate. That's my only concern about the whole application. I'd move grant.
Okay. Did ask Ian to...
Thank you, Convener. It was just to clarify, Councillor Blackwood, I presume that the motion would be to agree the officer recommendations plus the addition of the healthcare contribution that Julie and Bernard mentioned earlier?
Yes, Ian, thank you.
Anyone else? Provost?
Thank you, Convener. Convener, I'm quite sure that you'll realise, that the rest of the committee, that we could say quite a lot on this application, but I'm decided just to go with the officer's recommendation and just keep to the planning. And I'm quite happy to second the motion by Councillor Blackwood to agree the recommendations of officers. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Hughes?
Yes, Convener. Through yourself, may I ask a number of questions of the planners in relation to the report?
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously, because I do feel that that there's lots of considerations that have to be made before a decision can be rushed into. On the question of children's services, now that would be paragraph 13. Is there a representative from Children's Services here today?
No, I don't believe so.
Right, Convener, unfortunately, we weren't able to get a representative from Children's Services to attend today because of other commitments.
Right, so as a mitigation, as a material consideration, I would consider that the point being made by Children's Services is that the development would exacerbate capacity pressures at Braes High School. And that should be, in my view, should be taken into consideration. Although we've said that a contribution, what I wanted to ask basically was the number of children that would be generated from a development in terms of future projections or forecasting in relation to education. But obviously, as I'm not here, I would just take it that the increase, looking at the paragraph, trying to make an assumption what it's based on, would be that the increase of population and also children would exacerbate the capacity pressures at Braes High School. I'm not sure what the contribution of £221,000 would actually go towards, because if there was a large increase in the number of children, it wouldn't substantially, in my opinion, because I don't really know the ins and outs or the viability of such matters, would not substantially increase, shall we say, if an extension to Braes High School was required. I don't think £221,000 would actually add to that. My other points in terms of mitigation, or should I say, material consideration, under paragraph 38. Now, I noticed that in the past, the council's land supply, housing land supply, was part of previous considerations. But would I be right in asking that in terms of this planning application, that this consideration would not apply?
Bernard?
Yep, Convener, do you want me to deal with the first point in relation to children's services?
Yes, if you don't mind, Bernard.
It was just to clarify that obviously we have received a consultation response from Children's Services, and they have recommended that it would be appropriate to seek a contribution. Now that contribution is based on research carried out by Children's Services. There's established local development plan policy plus supplementary guidance. So the money that's sought there is seen by Children's Services to be sufficient to mitigate the impacts of the development in relation to education provision. Your second point in relation to land supply, I think what I would comment there is that in this instance, since the application was previously considered, as we've mentioned, the policy position has moved on. This application has been reassessed against the LDP2, the current and up-to-date local plan, and that allocates this site as a housing site for the 91 units. So it's a slightly different position, is that whereas previously land supply was an issue, things have moved on, and in accordance with the new development plan, it isn't the same case. This is an allocated site for that number of houses, for 91 units.
Yeah, the point I was trying to make was that that in terms of the overall scheme of LDP2, that this inclusion of 91 units is not part of the overall factor in terms of housing required.
It is part of the overall land supply calculation for the council area. So the overall figure of land supply takes into account the allocation of this site.
Yes, I appreciate that, but what I'm trying to get at was that that in the past, developers used to say that an application should be passed because there was a problem with supply, land supply. Would that argument apply within this application?
No, because this is an allocated site. I think the circumstances you're referring to are cases where it's maybe been that the council has had a shortfall in its land supply. And that's an argument been put forward by developers that additional housing allocations are needed to address a shortfall in land supply. But that's not the case here. This is an allocated housing site with an indicative capacity of 91 units.
Right. In terms of the general aspect of the surrounding the site, I'm interested in finding out if cumulative effect is considered part of the planning considerations. For example, Wollaston recently was considered that there should be no more house building there because of the cumulative effect of previous development. Also, Redmuir Head itself, in fact, has had quite a substantial development, new development over the years, and Shield Hill itself would be described possibly as having limited development opportunity for house building. So in that sense, would you agree, well, and from a planning perspective, that increased development or growth of development of houses can cause over provision in terms of number of houses, which would then have a knock-on effect on the green space available? So basically, is it the case that Redmuir Head, in general terms, has less green space within its boundaries?
Councillor Hughes, I think we're perhaps straying there into considerations that were looked at through the examination of LDP2. So that would be the point where the reporter was looking at all representations that have been received and the general overall policy of the council on where land should be or should not be allocated for housing development. So those more strategic issues were matters that were considered through the LDP2 process prior to its approval.
But I'm just looking basically at a map, and it shows lots of housing development, but very little green space. And what I'm trying to draw from yourself is the fact that when you have lots of development, you invariably have less green space.
So I may be misunderstanding you. I mean, certainly open space is a consideration in the determination of applications. And you perhaps be aware from the local development plan that there's areas, swathes of land that are identified as open space areas, and the specific policies relating to the protection of open space.
What I was actually looking at was my point was basically that in the vicinity of Redmuir Head area, we have, and it is recognised that Wollaston itself has an over provision of housing. Redmuir Head itself has also grown exponentially over the years, and Shield Hill is limited in terms of house building. What I basically would be concerned about is coalescence in terms of villages. With more development, you end up with basically a situation where you can't actually differentiate between one village and the next. And within those parameters, is it important to have green space delineating, shall we say, house building within each village, or otherwise you would end up with a concrete jungle?
Yeah, I understand the point you're making there, Councillor. I think from my point of view, I would come back to what members are being asked to consider today is the planning application before them in the context of the adopted local development plan. And as has been touched on a number of occasions this morning, under Section 25 of the Act, members are asked to consider and determine an application in accordance with the development plan, unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise. So the issues that you've raised there about coalescence or allocation of housing sites, those are issues that are looked at through the preparation and adoption approval of the local development plan. what members are being asked to consider here today is an application against that approved development plan, LDP2, and that plan allocates this as a housing site.
Yes, but the planning committee also has within its view the ability to overturn a decision within the local development plan.
I appreciate the point you're making there. I suppose that's where I'd mentioned that's where it comes to consideration of material considerations. What I'm wondering there, are you suggesting that there are that open space is a material consideration which you feel strongly would be a reason to go against the adopted development plan and the allocation of this site as a housing site?
Yes, I'm thinking that at the moment, in terms of consideration, the topicality at the moment is basically the green economy, or in fact the green agenda, and in this type of situation, I think we should have consideration of the green agenda, or it should be brought further up in terms onto our horizons, because obviously everyone talks about carbon footprint nowadays and climate change and climate emergencies. And I think that we have greater focus on such matters, and I would consider that linked to the open space as a material consideration. I also feel that although children's services might feel that a contribution might mitigate some of their concerns, I have to take into consideration that written in the document, children's services have advised that this development would exacerbate capacity pressures. And in the past, education was a material consideration. So I have two material considerations, one of education, one of open space linked to the climate change emergency, which is a part of the planning process, and also I think a material consideration is the housing land supply, which isn't a factor in this matter. I also think, can I also ask you, in terms of paragraph 9 to 11, when we're talking about community bus services, I notice that obviously within the report there has been a change of consideration. And when we look at planning applications, we also have to look at viability as a factor in terms of a business plan. So if this was an application with a business plan within it, which it has, in terms of the contribution for the bus, into my thinking, what is actually happening here is that the value of the contribution, as stated in 2016, has been devalued under the 2021 considerations in terms of prices. So you would actually get less value for the money which is being offered. So I consider that would be a material consideration. And obviously, with those views, I personally would consider that I would refuse this application. That I'm putting forward my amendment, which basically says that this application should be refused. Is that a competent convener, for me to say that.
Thank you, convener. And Councillor Hughes, I've got a note of a number of items you consider are material considerations. I think primarily there were issues over open space, the link to the green agenda, as you put it, and concerns about exacerbating capacity pressures, notwithstanding the availability of a contribution which the applicant's willing to pay. I think you'd mentioned that there were some issues about the amount of housing in the area and concern over a diminution in the bus contribution. Turning to the open space and the green agenda, I wonder if I could ask, and with the convener's forbearance, my planning colleagues to perhaps see if they could share the relevant policies that relate to these matters, because I think it would probably be helpful to run through these. Bernard, I don't know if that's something you would be able to do with Julie.
Bernard? Or Julie?
Sorry, Kavina, just having trouble with my mute button there. Sorry, just to clarify, the reports that are relevant are included in the committee papers in the Appendix 1. Were you looking for those to be displayed on screen?
If you could, my thoughts were probably P16, protection of open space, maybe one to put on screen.
If you can bear with me, I'll just see if I can get the report up on my screen and then share that.
And thank you for bearing with us. I think in any planning determination, it's important to have regard to all the relevant provisions of the development plan when making a consideration. Thank you, convener.
So it's just taking me a moment to get up the report on my screen.
Just want to know, well, the plans have been brought forward. You had intimated you wanted to speak?
Yep, thanks, convener. I'll try and be as quick as possible so that the information can get put up.
Excuse me, sorry, convener, to butt in, but Councillor Bowes has had his hand up for quite some time.
I apologise for that.
You want me to continue, convener?
Councillor Bowes after Councillor Nimmo.
Okay, Councillor Nimmo, you've started, so as they say, you can finish.
Okay, thanks for that. Convener, can I just start off with seconding Councillor Hughes' amendment? I think that's the right way forward. I have a couple of points to make in relation to that. Can I ask Julia a question just in relation to the number of representations that have been made in relation to this application? I know that today's paperwork, it mentions 13 additional representations, but there's also been a petition from the Braes Green Space with 213 signatures on it. Can she just confirm how many representations we've actually had against this application in total?
Thank you, Councillor. As you said, I'm just going to refer through the report. What we did, given the passage of time, is that we notified everybody who had originally made comment on the application, and we also reserved neighbour notification to take account of any changes in ownership. So, following that, we received it was 13 new objections and 2 letters of support, and we also received a petition. Just trying to find so there's a petition that we received. It was an electronic survey with 213 signatures, and they were supporting Braes Green Space and the following actions, which was to appeal to Persimmon Homes to withdraw from the application and walk away, to refuse the application in favour of the proposals of the Braes Community Woodland, and in support of the Part 5 right to buy land for further sustainable development. So those were the additional representations that we got. And originally to the application, if you bear with me, I'll quickly tell you how many representations that we received. So originally, and from the outset, we received 11 objection letters and 1 neutral representation. So members should note that some of the people who've made comment recently made comment at the outset, but in total that would be 24 objections, 1 neutral, 2 support, and then the petition that we've received.
Okay, thanks very much for
No
clarifying
problem.
that, Julie. If I can maybe just go on and pick up on one of the points that Councillor Hughes alluded to, and it's in relation to the Section 75 payments. Now, personally speaking, and as a local member for the area, I don't think the infrastructure is currently in place to support such a large development. We're talking about 91 additional houses. The issue with the Braes High School and the capacity, that's a real live issue. There is no capacity or very little capacity within the school there. Meadowbank Health Centre, you're lucky if you can get an appointment with a GP at the moment, so there's severe capacity issues within the health centre at the moment. And the Section 75 payments, although they're welcome, they don't solve the problem. They fall far short, in my view, of solving the problem. But there's also issues with the local primary school and the capacity issues there. It's an issue right across the district in a lot of schools, and it's something that we really need to take into account as far as this is concerned. But like I said, Convener, I'm happy to second the amendment by Councillor Hughes, as I see that as the right way forward. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bowes.
I see Mr. Whittle's got his pages up. I'll let him speak if you're going to speak on them first.
Well, Councillor Bowes, I can take them down if you wanted to speak first.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind, Bernard, because I might have some more questions or some other bits and pieces to add to it. Convener, first of all, one of the things and one of the questions I've got, and it's a direct individual question on this, and I appreciate the LDP2 now notes this for 91 houses as a development in the area. However, from when we originally looked at this, I think it was said earlier on it was 30. That number may be right, maybe 1 or 2. I can't just remember the exact number on it. Bernard, I don't see that this plot is actually a part, if I remember correctly, it's actually described of it's a part of an entire plot. Would we have been putting that forward as 91 units if the original application hadn't gone through, or would it more likely have remained the 30, which was in LDP1, with other parts of the area? I think, if I remember, there was other parts of the area with marked for housing. So that's one part of that question. The second part of that individual question is, can you confirm that the other parts of this plot have now been removed for housing? I have got other questions, but probably best to answer that one first.
Okay, I'm just wondering whether it's appropriate to bring Alistair Shaw in, given his involvement in the local development plan process and the process through the examination. Just wanted to drop that on you, Alistair. Would you be able to pick that up?
Yeah, sure. I think what Councillor Boyce is asking is, what the influence that the minded to grant decision had on in terms of decisions that were made through the LDP2, the proposed plan. I think it's fair to say that that decision and the consideration of that application, that detailed application, was material in terms of deciding where, what to recommend in terms of LDP2. It had demonstrated that that content, the number of units could be accommodated, and the council was happy with that. So that was basically effectively reflected back into the LDP2, and then that was obviously tested at the examination. And again, so the reporter at the LDP2 examination looked at that. He looked at that, the decision that had been made, and he looked at it himself, and was happy that the site was capable of accommodating that quantity of units.
Okay, right. That's part one of it. The other part is the other areas, because I think O56 is an entire area on LDP1. Because if I remember right, there was other houses, and one of the discussions then was that this area is 91 houses, and by the time you multiply it through, you're going to be massively over for what the whole area is. Has the other areas now been removed for housing?
Yeah, the allocated site is the same as the site for the applications before you. There are no additional areas.
Yeah, so we were able to remove them, the other areas. Right, yep. So and that's sort of showing the effect, I think, that the original decision made, and I get that and understand that. The other thing I'm looking at here is, and I'm picking up on something Gordon said about number of housing, and recently I think the committee passed an application for the brickworks. Was it about 400 houses, if I remember rightly, which was actually not on a housing site. So that comes within the Braes area. So we're actually getting to a point then that you've got potential oversupply of housing. I know there's been various ones in the past which have gone through for undersupply. With that application being cleared, if this goes and everything else goes ahead, it's in the Braes area, we're actually going to be 400 houses over what LDP2 is planned for the area. Now, I'm happy to be corrected on that, but can you just confirm if that's right?
Yeah, yes, I mean, it's correct in the sense that there is those are additional units that weren't, they're not allocated units in LDP2. It's maybe worth saying that there's a windfall allocation in LDP2, so we allow for windfall sites to come forward, and that's an essential part of actually meeting our overall requirement. Potentially what we'd see that site potentially as contributing to that windfall requirement, or contributing that extra flexibility that the windfall requirement is needed for.
Thanks for that, Alistair. I appreciate the windfall is over the whole Falkirk district area. But thanks for answering that. That sort of ties up what I thought, and I'm thinking about the specific area of the Braes, because then you go back to what Gordon and Alan have said, is the pressures then added on to the doctor's surgery, the pressure that's added on to the school, and the overall infrastructure pressures that's added. We know there's an amount of infrastructure pressures on the previous one. I don't want to go over that one again, but so you do have, as was said earlier on, a cumulative action happening here, and that's what gives me an amount of concern. I am also very supportive of the Braes, the green plan area. I think that's a good idea, and if we are going to have even if those 400 come in balancing out to 91, 300 houses above what was looked at for that specific area, then surely we need to protect some green area. So I am quite strongly behind what what Gordon has said, in particular about the green side of things, and also the infrastructure. And my concern is that we have a situation here which has been argued successfully in the past, where there was an undersupply, and in this particular area, I think we're getting to a situation where there's an oversupply in one particular locale rather than spread over the entire area. So for those reasons, I'll be supporting Councillor Hughes and Nimmo.
Thank you for that, Councillor Bowes. Councillor Murtagh.
Thanks, Convener. my questions were kind of similar in some ways to Councillor Bowes. I mean, I think we're all very mindful of the legal advice that you know, has been expressed and I know that Gordon Bernard's outlined, you know, the section of the Town and Country Planning Act in which we are looking at making a decision, and that was mentioned in deputations also. So I want to be very clear on that about, you know, determining this application based on what's before us now as a new application. I think though that the question about the inclusion in the local development plan, as we've got to judge it as members, whether there's any material considerations why we would go against officers' recommendations, is an important point about how this site became included in the development plan for allocated to this number of houses in quite a specific way. And I totally take the point that this has been seen, obviously, in the process of the reporter then saw it before it came back and we approved it. But without being too indelicate about it, I don't think that we were particularly going to be sure about what was happening with this site in the last few years, and that in any other site, when we were talking about LDP2, probably for us as local members to say, right, can we look at this issue or that issue regarding that and the inclusion in the plan? This probably would have been a site where I would have felt, without knowing what was actually going on for the reasons we won't mention, probably not wanting to wade into discussion about whether it should have been down to the 30 previously or the 90 or whatever. And I think that that's important in terms of the context of accepting that, yes, we have to legally look at the local development plan that's passed and before us, and that includes this as an allocated site. However, I am concerned about overdevelopment in general of the area, that this particular footprint of the site is that the 91 houses, it's too large in terms of the suitability. Obviously, having been out on site before on numerous occasions, my view hasn't changed in terms of, you know, the geography of the site. I do think that perhaps a specific consideration in terms of material consideration being that when we did the local development plan, perhaps we weren't as far down the climate emergency path as what we were, and in the context of COP26, and we've now passed as a council further climate targets. We've passed further policies regarding climate, and I think that would be a material consideration that was not part of our considerations in our local development plan too when we considered it and looked at this. And I think that for those reasons and many others, I would be supportive that that on overdevelopment of this specific site being a material consideration, and I think, to be fair, the point that was trying to be made by Community Council from the point of view of questioning not the reasons why in the process, but the inclusion legitimately of this site as a as an approved site for development is important that we consider that. So I'm also minded to support the amendment, and I think, you know, but in particular on the grounds of overdevelopment, and that there needs to be further emphasis given to the green space and open space that's in the specific local area.
Thank you.
Thanks, convener. Oh, as one of the local ward members, this whole application definitely concerns me. I've listened intently to my colleagues and the various arguments that have been put forward. The fact that every community council in that whole area is objecting to this application concerns me to the point where it would be quite a lot of unrest in the area. I think the population in this whole ward of the Breeze are trying to hold on to as much of their land that's left that they can, given that we are in a climate emergency and we're speaking a lot about protecting our green spaces, then that has to be considered. What I was considering is the whole volume of transport, of traffic in the area. I'm well aware of the issues on the Shield Hill Bridge, and I see here at point 7 the roads development, I've got no objections. But I wondered, maybe Mr. Steedman can tell me when the last time they were actually up there. Is this objection, no objections coming from when they viewed the application back in 16-17, or have they actually been up and viewed the volume of traffic that's now coming down that brae and the problems that people are having with speeding? And I know at the moment, this moment in time, we're looking at putting calming measures in there, and the whole brae area has been reviewed. Given that there's only one entrance seems to be into this development and out again, I can only see a much larger volume of traffic in that area that's already exasperated. Russell, have you got some comment, please?
Yes, from our perspective, I think as far as the volume of traffic concerns, I'll defer that to Kevin Collins, who transport planning, they deal with that part of it. From our perspective, we're just looking at the visibility at the junction onto the B10. Nothing's changed, and it's fine as far as we're concerned.
Anyone else?
Has Kevin got?
Sorry, convener.
Yeah.
I'll try and
There's
get
another
here and
one.
answer the question. Sorry, I was a wee bit late in getting my microphone unmuted. We have analysed the transport assessment that was submitted by it and are reasonably satisfied with the relevant amount of traffic that was going to be generated by the site. In reference to have we been there and looked at the traffic volumes and speed, we've actually carried out the monitoring on basically on the road, basically from Readymuir Head to Shield Hill in 2019 in and around Fairhaven Terrace as part of obviously that application that had come forward as well. So we have actually had more up-to-date information that we've collected since the previous application was submitted and was reviewed. So we have a fair bit of information sitting in our database, and the level of traffic and the speed of traffic is something that obviously gets reviewed by some of our colleagues in Network and Russell, and that looking at any other elements that would have to be introduced. We have passed that information over to the community councils and in the past, and we have already passed some of the information on to Police Scotland as well, because any traffic speeding issues is a traffic enforcement issue that's not the remit of the council. So we have collected more up-to-date information since the previous application has been lodged.
So then there is agreement that there is already pressures on that area, and obviously a further volume of transport and congestion in the area with an entrance in, the single entrance in and out, could then put further pressure. Would you agree on further pressure on that area?
We have done the previous analysis as part of the transport assessment, and we were satisfied there's adequate capacity on the local road network to cope with the level of development that was put forward. The original transport assessment that was submitted for one of the previous applications was for a larger site, again, of 112 units. So we still utilise that, even though the number of units on the site had then dropped down to the 90 odds that are now being under consideration. We did do the analysis of it, and we were satisfied that the impact on the local road network was adequate. There was adequate capacity on the road network at that time that the analysis was carried out.
Kevin, can I ask you, when you do the analysis, do you take into consideration the pollution, the air pollution, where at certain times of the day, obviously there would possibly be congestion, given the fact that most of these developments tend to be commuter areas? We, as part of our analysis, we look at the impact on road capacity. Air quality is an area of, it's out with my area of expertise. Perhaps maybe David Gray would be able to answer questions on any air quality impact assessments that would be looked at as part of development sites, because that, for the larger scale sites, there are, as well as transport assessments, we get air quality impact assessments, things like that submitted in support of any of the applications by the applicants. But certainly it's not something we would review in transport planning. Any kind of
air quality issues we dealt with our colleagues in environmental health. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Me, David.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Nicholl, then Councillor Blackwood.
Thank you, David. I think it won't surprise anybody, especially you, David, seeing we've both been on this committee for so long together over the years, to hear that I'm always wary of coalescence of villages and undue development that has impact on things like health centres and schools. And to that extent, I concur with what has been said by my colleagues, Councillors Nimmo and McHugh. I think, though, there's one thing that does worry me about this application, in that all these things that have been argued by Adana and Alan there, I certainly would have had the same view had we rolled back the clock a number of years. However, we are where we are, and this application comes with a strong recommendation to approve. And also, as you know, David, it comes with undertakings that the applicant would have to make to provide financial contributions to various things, sadly not to road improvements, but however to the school, to green space and to the health centre, much needed. As I say, in normal circumstances, I would have been totally against this application, but with such a weight of professional opinion, such as what we've just heard from Kevin Collins there, I respect Colin very much, but I think a lot of our constituents in Upper Braes and Lower Braes wouldn't necessarily agree with what he has said. But I do know that should this go to appeal, then there would be a lot of weight given to what the views of people like Colin are, and the fact that this has been in the LDP, approved in the LDP. I would like to ask, and I think I know the answer, but I would still like to ask, should this go to appeal, as I would suspect very much it would that mean that the financial contributions that are promised in the recommendations, is there a guarantee that they would continue to happen? Or is it, I fear, the application is approved on appeal without the financial contributions? So my heart, I think my heart tells me to support Gordon and reject it out of hand, but my head is telling me that at the end of the day, I suspect this is going to go ahead, irrespective of the views that we have here. And there's £500,000 of improvements, which I would like to see if this housing development does come to fruition. I would like to see these developments. So is there anybody could guarantee that on appeal, these contributions would still be forthcoming?
Ian.
Thank you, convener. Obviously, guarantees who can second guess, but what I would say is that the reporter would be looking at information provided by the council. They would be looking at the development plan in the same way that we would be in taking a decision. They would be looking at the supplementary guidance around contributions, and they would assess the infrastructure deficiencies, what our policy position is. And I would be surprised if there wasn't a very similar outcome on contributions. I don't know, Bernard, if you have anything to add to that.
Thanks, Ian. No, you're quite right. I think the point, as you say, is that the application would then be considered by the reporters, and they would have before them the information that's before members today. So they'd have to take a considered view as to whether there's good reason to go along with the recommended contributions. As Ian mentions, you can't give absolute guarantees, but it would be the same thought process in terms of the information that would be for the reporter.
Yes, Michael, you quite happy with that?
Well, you know, David, it's still a difficult position. It's This one's head against heart, because I always like to get things guaranteed and money in the bank, and yeah, okay.
Anything else? Mr. Blackwood, you wish to come back?
Sorry?
Did you wish to come back?
No, I didn't. I didn't indicate I was going back, sorry.
Okay, Bernard, do you want to finish up by looking at the policy issues?
Thanks, Convener. I'll just share the screen with the policies that Ian had mentioned. So I think the policies that were specifically mentioned were the policy P16, which relates to protection of open space. And you'll see there that the policy sets out that development which will result in the loss of open space will only be permitted where, and it then lists the various criteria against which an application would be assessed. So it would be before members to consider if they feel it's contrary to those policies, to the detail of that policies, on what grounds do they feel that it is contrary to the terms set out there.
Bernard, it's Ian. The writing's relatively small. Would you be good enough to run through that, please, Bernard?
All right, yeah, so the policy says development which will result in the loss of open space will only be permitted where there is no adverse effect on the character or appearance of the area, particularly through loss of amenity space planned as an integral part of a development. Second bullet point is there will be no significant adverse effect on the overall recreational provision in the local area, taking account of the Council's open space standards as defined within the open space strategy, or the loss will be compensated for by qualitative improvements to other open space in the local area commensurate with its recreational value. Guidance on how loss of open space should be compensated is set out in Supplementary Guidance SG05, Green Infrastructure and New Development. Third bullet point, the area is not of significant ecological value, and fourth bullet point, connectivity within and functionally of the wider green network is not threatened, and public access routes in or adjacent to the open space will be safeguarded. Second point of the policy states, where development would also involve the loss of outdoor sports facilities, it must additionally be demonstrated that, first bullet point, the proposed development is ancillary to the principal use of the site as an outdoor sports facility, or, second bullet point, the proposed development involves a minor part of the outdoor sports facility which would not affect its use and potential for sport and training, or the outdoor sports facility which would be lost would be replaced by a new facility of comparable or greater benefit for sport and in a location which is convenient for its use, or by the upgrading of an existing outdoor sports facility to provide a better quality facility either within the same site or at another location which is convenient for its users and which maintains or improves the overall playing capacity in the area, or lastly, the Council's pitch strategy and consultation with Sports Scotland has shown that there is a clear excess of provision to meet current and anticipated demand in the area, and the site could be developed without detriment to the overall quality of provision. So it's a fairly lengthy policy, but I think I suspect what members are going to be looking at there is the first part of that policy and the four first bullet points that relate to point 1.
Bernard, it's Ian again. What's the view in relation to ecological value of the site?
I think as set out in the report, Ian, there's an indication there that officers' view is that it doesn't, the site is not of significant archaeological value.
Thank you, Bernard. And with the convener's leave, I think we have a mover and a seconder of a motion, and I think it was moved by Councillor Hughes. Councillor Hughes, what's your view in terms of that policy provision?
I think there is also a wider consideration in relation to the loss of open space. It is also the loss of well-being for the community. And I also think that that is a material consideration, because local authorities have now got to look at the well-being of communities, and the loss of open space from also acts. Open space is both a recreational endeavour, because if people go for walks or use these type of facilities, then it does affect their well-being if there is no open space.
Okay, does anyone else have anything they want to add or clarify before we go to vote? Okay.
Thank you. With the convener's
Sorry,
leave again.
Convener.
Yeah.
Could I ask a quick question? This land we're talking about being open space, I thought it was private owned land, and isn't it open space? If the owner puts a fence round about it and stops any access to it, and then you stop them doing that.
Ian?
Thank you. There are some statutory rights of access, notwithstanding it's over private land.
Okay, and what are they in this instance?
As far as I'm aware, this land isn't fenced off, it's open. It's not subject to any buildings that would restrict access in terms of legislation. So, for instance, there are rights of access over some private areas, but perhaps not where there's a house or a factory or a business operating there. But where it's an open area that's unfenced off, there are rights to roam.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, Convener. I was just going to try to sum up.
Convener, sorry, apologies. Could I just come in very quickly on the points being made about the open space? Because I think one thing that's maybe not clear in this committee, we obviously we've not talked a lot about the value of the ecological value of the site to the community. And I know that what Bernard said there in terms of the assessment of officers, but one of the reasons I think we visited the site a number of times before, and part of that was to try so that the committee members at the time could understand the character and the biodiversity of the area, how the community used it, etc., which we're not talking about here, because I think we all kind of feel we know that information, but I want to make it clear that that's part of the consideration here in terms of understanding the site, and that there's perhaps a contrary view of what the ecological and biodiversity value of the area to the community, and the evidence being given on that differs from what officers are saying, and that's partly where my opinion has come in to say on that policy that was highlighted on screen in terms of the reasons we could refuse and have it as a material consideration, that I think it is of ecological value, and that you can't there's no in the open space strategy that's specifically mentioned within that policy and how you could compensate for it. I don't think for that locality in that local area there's anything comparable that could be put in to compensate for that, which is why I think that it's an important material consideration. So it's not something we've dwelt on in the debate, but I think it's important that it's mentioned and that the public understand that that's part of why that's in. We've taken a lot of evidence on that previously, or looked at it a lot, and you know, we're looking at this afresh absolutely, but that's important. And if other committee members who weren't there at the time or didn't know wanted an opportunity to think about that more, I would be supportive of them if they feel they wanted more information on that. But I've certainly got enough information, but I think it's an important part of the debate to mention.
I'm not quite sure the quality of the open space is there. It seems to me more scrubland than anything else, judging by the photographs. But in your hands, colleagues, anyone else got any questions or points you wish to see clarified? You finish your sum up?
Thank you, convener. I'll try to sum up, and please, those that moved or seconded the amendment, please interrupt me if you think I've not quite got the gist of anything. And indeed, Bernard and Julie, if there's anything that you would like to add, please do so. My notes would be that the committee would resolve to refuse the application for the following reasons. The first reason I noted relates to the policy that was on screen, which is P16 and protection of open space. So the development would be contrary to that, as it would adversely impact on the overall recreational provision in the local area. It would adversely impact on connectivity with and functionality of the wider green network. And it would also have an adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. In addition to that, Councillor Hughes had referred to it having an adverse impact on the well-being of the community and inhabitants. So we then also had a refusal reason that, notwithstanding the ability to seek contributions, it's considered that development would have an adverse impact on the capacity of infrastructure within the area, and that would be insufficient to accommodate the development, and in particular that it would exacerbate capacity pressures at Braes High School. The next item I've noted, and I'm not sure, Councillor Hughes, you can perhaps correct me. I've noted that you considered that you considered there was an adverse diminution in the benefit of the bus service contribution.
Yes.
It was also noted as a refusal reason that this development would be considered to be oversupply and overdevelopment of housing in the local area, having regard to cumulative development in the area, as well as adverse impact on open and green space and coalescence of settlements. So there's quite a lot in there, but does that seem to sum up? I'd also noted at one point, Councillor, I think it was McHugh, had mentioned road traffic, but that wasn't part of the original amendment. Councillor Hughes.
I think it's obviously a consideration. Can we put that in?
I'm in your hands, and your seconder, and indeed the convener, in terms of an amendment, as it were. Perhaps some wording would be considered to have an adverse impact on the road traffic and road safety. I think that was my gist of what was said.
Yep. Councillor Nimmo, would you be happy with that?
I'm quite happy for that to be added, Gordon. It's not a problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan.
And in terms of my planning colleagues, do you have any thoughts as well?
Sorry, convener. I'm just wondering whether the point being made by Councillor Murtagh in relation to biodiversity maybe picks up on points referenced in policy PE13, which relates to the green and blue network, which again is that policy is in the papers that you have. Sorry, I haven't got the page before me, but I can display it on the screen, I think, if needed. But that makes reference to enhancement of multifunctional network of green and blue spaces, outdoor access, landscaping character, those sort of issues, climate change. So not seeking to lead members, but just trying to pick up on the points that were mentioned in discussion. Ian, maybe you can keep me right whether those are relevant in relation to that policy.
It was certainly discussed, but I think in terms of the specific application, Bernard, do you have policy PE 13 to hand?
Yes, bear with me, I'll just share that.
And apologies to everyone on the call for taking some time, but as I mentioned earlier, we are under an obligation to consider all relevant provisions of the development plan in taking a decision.
Remember, is that large enough for people to see on the screen, or do you need me to read through it?
Bernard, could I ask if you could read through it?
Yeah, so that's policy P13 Green and Blue Network. First point is the council will support the delivery of the Central Scotland Green Network in the Falkirk area and Falkirk Green Space, a strategy for our green network through the development and enhancement of a multifunctional network of green and blue components and corridors as set out in the spatial strategy. 2, within the green and blue network, the key priorities of biodiversity, outdoor access, landscape, character enhancement, climate change, placemaking, and serving disadvantaged communities will be promoted, with particular reference to the opportunities detailed in the proposals and opportunities schedule. And 3, new development shall contribute to the green and blue network where appropriate through the integration of green infrastructure into master plans or through enabling opportunities for green and blue network improvement on adjacent land in accordance with SG05 green infrastructure and new development. And 4, the 7 community growing sites identified at Appendix 1, Proposal GEGN24 shall be safeguarded from development unless proposals can demonstrate on a case-by-case basis that there is no longer a proven demand for allotment space. Not sure if that assists members at all. It's a sort of general policy.
Thanks, Bernard. Would it be fair to say that if members were minded to consider that, they would be considering impact of the development and the delivery and priorities of the Central Scotland Green Network?
Convener, with you leaving out mentioning it, it was referring to what's contained within that policy, in particular point 2. So for me, ecology covers, biodiversity is part of that, and in that sense, the first points which Ian was reading out right at the beginning of the reasons for refusal, I don't know if they can simply be an additional reference to that policy in that part, or needs an additional clause, because in effect that's where I envisaged it was already covered by the amendment. So if it would augment it to make reference to that clause, if the mover and seconder were in agreement, I think that would help. But that would be my understanding of the general ecology. It includes the biodiversity and that protection and characterisation for the local area.
Hey, Councillor Hughes,
yes, would be happy. I obviously have to refer to Councillor Nimmo to see if he is in agreement.
Again, Gordon, I'm quite happy with that. I think it makes sense.
Right, thank you, Alan.
Councillor McHugh, you wish to come back in?
No, I'm happy with that as long as the environment's been highlighted. That's great. Thank you.
Likewise, it requires the mover, seconder, and the convener of the meeting to agree the amendment to the motion, as it were. Are you happy to agree that addition?
Good, yeah.
Thank you, convener. So I think where we are is what I read out. Now, forgive me, but I'm not going to read it out again. But it was with the addition of adverse impact on road traffic and road safety, and a provision, a refusal reason that would be the proposed development is contrary to policy PE 13. Green and Blue Network, as it would have an adverse impact on the delivery and priorities of the Central Scotland Green Network. So on that basis, convener, if you're happy for me to sum up and go to the vote. We have a motion by Councillor Blackwood, which is second. Oh, pardon me, convener.
way ahead of yourself. Having an opportunity to attend, we meet for the committee to lead, and certainly done so, and the quality of the debate has been very, very good. I'm like Councillor Nicholl, I'm torn in head and heart. I'd hate to see £600,000 disappear out the braes, or not be invested in the braes as it should be. And equally, I believe very much in representing local opinion when it comes to planning issues. It comes to the big issues related to the communities. So there's a dilemma for myself that by the time you've finished summing up, I may have resolved, but it's there. This has been a difficult application to preside over. But I want to sum up now, Ian.
Thank you, Convener. We have a motion by Councillor Blackwood, which is seconded by Provost Buchanan, and that is to grant or agree that the committee is minded to grant planning permission, and that would be with the inclusion in the provisions around the Section 75 planning obligation of healthcare contributions, as narrated by Julie earlier in the meeting. And we then have an amendment by Councillor Hughes, which is seconded by Councillor Nimmo, which is to refuse the application for the reasons that I read out earlier on. So in terms of a roll call, Councillor Alexander.
For the amendment.
Amendment. Thank you, Convener. Provost Buchanan. Sorry, Provost Buchanan.
Motion, thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Councillor Blackwood.
A motion.
Councillor Bowes.
Amendment.
Councillor Goldie. Sorry, Councillor Goldie. Councillor Goldie. Cannon, do you know if Councillor Goldie's having technical difficulties? Apologies for the pause. Thank you, Convener. I think Councillor Goldie may not be in the meeting at the moment, and we'll perhaps move on, and if he can reconnect before the end of the vote, that would be beneficial. Councillor Hughes.
The amendment.
Councillor Kerr is absent. Councillor McHugh.
For the amendment.
Councillor McCluckie is absent. Councillor Murtagh.
The amendment.
And Councillor Nicholl.
51% for the motion, 49% for the amendment. That's how I feel.
Thank you, Councillor.
Motion.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholl. And Councillor Nimmo.
Amendment.
And Karen, I take it that you're unable to contact Councillor Goldie.
Yeah, I've tried to contact Councillor Goldie on his mobile twice, and that's just gone to his voicemail.
Well, thank you. We'll note Councillor Goldie having left the meeting at that point. So by my calculations, we have 3 votes for the motion, and we have 1, 2, 3, 6 votes for the amendment. So the amendment would be duly carried. Thank you, convener.
You're on mute, David.
Apologies for that. Just thank everyone, officers and members, for their attendance this morning and their due consideration. It has been a difficult application over a number of years even. But I think that while there was always an either or situation that was going to create problems, 5149, Mr. Tickle's book, and I would say very, very close to the position of myself, 49. So thanks very much, folks, and see you at the next planning meeting.
Thanks to the chair.